All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep into the world of mergers and acquisitions in India.
It's a fascinating landscape, really.
We've got this academic paper you sent over, and let me tell you, it's way more interesting than it sounds at first. We're going to break it down, cut through all that legal jargon, and uncover what really makes Indian M&A tick. We'll cover the history, the hurdles, all the good stuff.
It's a story of dramatic shifts and changes, I can tell you that.
Ooh, I like where this is going. So this paper jumps right in talking about the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act of 1969, the MRTPA. You familiar with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a bit infamous in the M&A world. See, they were trying to prevent monopolies, right?
Yeah.
Keep the playing field level. But ironically, it kind of backfired.
Really? How so?
Well, it ended up creating this huge bottleneck, basically putting a freeze on most M&A activity for decades.
Wow, I did not know that. So what changed?
So in the early 90s, India liberalized its economy, and suddenly, boom, the M&A scene exploded.
Makes sense.
Of course, with that, they needed new rules, which led to the Takeover Code of 1994. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Throughout the 2000s, Indian companies, they were on this global acquisition spree, buying up companies left and right. But at the same time, foreign direct investment into India remained surprisingly low. It wasn't until around 2011 that this trend really started to reverse.
That is interesting. What do you think caused that hesitation? Was it just the regulations?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's a complex web of factors. Regulations were definitely a part of it, but there were also concerns about bureaucracy, unclear policies. And even just perceptions of market volatility play a role. It took time for reforms to be implemented and for India's economic stability to really shine through. Only then did foreign investors really start to take notice.
So it's kind of like you need to understand the whole backstory to really grasp what's happening now.
Exactly. Context is everything.
All right, well, on that note, let's talk about the major players in the Indian M&A world today. Who are the key players we need to know about?
So this paper breaks it down into 6 key institutions. Think of them as the governing bodies, each with their own set of rules and regulations.
Okay, got it. 6 main players.
Right. So first up, we have the Companies Act of 1956. This is like the foundation. It lays out how companies are formed, how they operate, even how they merge or get acquired.
The basics.
Exactly. Then there's the SEBI SAS&T regulations from 1997. Now, this one specifically deals with mergers and acquisitions in the context of listed companies and the stock market.
Right.
So basically, SEBI is there to ensure transparency and protect investors during these deals.
Makes sense. Got to keep things above board. Okay, so we've got the Companies Act and SEBI.
Right. And then we have the Competition Act of 2002,
Okay.
which is enforced by the Competition Commission of India, or CCI.
Right, the CCI.
Yeah. So they're basically the watchdogs making sure everything stays competitive.
Makes sense.
So if a merger looks like it might create a monopoly or, unfairly stifle competition, that's when the CCI steps in.
So they can actually block a merger?
Oh, absolutely. They can block it. They can impose penalties, especially for those big mergers, the ones that could really shake up the market.
Right, those are the ones to watch out for. So where does the taxman fit into all of this?
Yes. Well, we can't forget about taxes.
Never a good idea.
That's where the Income Tax Act of 1961 comes in. It makes sure that mergers and acquisitions are taxed properly, capital gains, depreciation, all that fun stuff.
It's like a whole other world of financial complexities.
Absolutely.
So we've got the Companies Act, SEBI, CCI, the Income Tax Department. Anyone else we should have on our radar?
Oh, yeah. 2 more big ones. So there's the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI. They're like the guardians of India's financial system.
Yeah.
And they keep a close eye on mergers and acquisitions, especially when it comes to things like foreign exchange, cross-border transactions, that sort of thing.
Right, making sure everything's on the up and up.
Exactly.
Okay, and the last of the big players.
Last but certainly not least, we have the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, or FIPB.
The FIPB?
Okay, now they have a lot of say when it comes to foreign investments in India, including mergers and acquisitions.
So if a foreign company wants to acquire part of an Indian company, they might have to go through the FIPB.
Exactly. It all depends on the industry and the size of the investment.
It's like this whole web of approvals and regulations. Speaking of which, this reminds me that the paper does mention some pretty big roadblocks in the Indian M&A process, even with all these players involved.
Yeah, it's not always smooth sailing. One of the biggest hurdles is the court-driven dispute resolution process.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even if you get all the initial approvals, things can still get tied up in legal battles.
And I imagine that leads to delays.
Oh, absolutely. Delays and uncertainty, and for businesses, Time is money.
For sure. So it's the courts that cause the biggest headaches.
Well, the courts are definitely a factor.
Yeah.
But the paper also points out that India doesn't really have a single window concept for approvals.
What does that mean exactly?
So instead of having one streamlined process, companies have to navigate multiple agencies, often at different levels of government.
So it can get pretty complicated.
It definitely can, especially for foreign companies who might not be familiar with the Indian system.
I can imagine.
And then on top of that, there's the issue of stamp duty.
Stamp duty.
Yeah, it's a tax, and it varies from state to state.
Yeah.
So you could be trying to close a deal, and suddenly you're hit with this unexpected tax burden just because the company you're acquiring is based in a different state.
Wow, that seems like it could really throw a wrench in things.
It definitely can. It adds another layer of complexity, and it has been known to derail deals altogether.
So with all these potential roadblocks, are there any solutions being offered? Or is this paper just highlighting the problems? So with all these potential roadblocks, are there any solutions being offered? Or is this paper just highlighting the problems?
Well, actually, the paper does offer some hope. It suggests some potential solutions to streamline the whole process.
Oh, good, because that's what I was hoping. So what are they suggesting?
One of the big ones is a push towards e-governance.
E-governance.
Yeah, so think online platforms for registrations, approvals, you name it. Even dispute resolution could potentially be brought online.
So basically bringing the whole M&A process into the digital age.
Exactly. It would cut down on so much paperwork and bureaucracy. And hopefully those frustrating delays, too.
That would be a huge win for everyone involved. And it aligns with India's overall move towards a more digital economy.
Right.
So e-governance, that's one solution. What else?
The paper also suggests a dedicated electronic registry just for mergers.
Okay, and what would that do exactly?
It would centralize all the information, make it easier for companies to find what they need, and it would help regulators keep track of everything too, make sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Sounds like a win-win. But what about those state-specific issues, like the stamp duty variations we talked about?
Yeah, that one's a bit trickier. The paper acknowledges that things need to be more uniform, but it doesn't really offer a concrete solution for that particular problem.
So it's still a bit of a wild card.
It is.
Yeah.
And it highlights how important it is to understand the nuances of each state. It's not just about the federal regulations. You got to know the local rules of the game, too.
It's like every state is its own little M&A arena.
In a way, yeah. And that's why it's so crucial to have expert guidance. Someone who really knows the ins and outs, both legally and practically.
Couldn't agree more. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for breaking it all down for me.
My pleasure. It's always fun to dive into these complex topics.
And for our listeners, if you're thinking about venturing into the world of Indian M&A, remember this is just a starting point.
Absolutely. Do your research and don't be afraid to ask for help.
There are experts out there who can guide you through the process. And with the right knowledge, the opportunities in India are vast.
For sure.
So until next time, happy deal making, everyone.